On my first episode on this podcast, I talked to Richard about how excited I was for all the things that we plan on doing with shared practices. What I was talking about when I said that was the Ownership Accelerator. The Ownership Accelerator is an online course that Richard and I have been planning for a very long time now, going over the specifics of buying a practice, a comprehensive look at all the steps and everything needed to successfully buy a practice. Well, the wait is almost over. We're going to be releasing the Ownership Accelerator in a little bit less than a month. And for those of you who've been waiting on our waiting list for more than a year now, the time has come for you to finally have access to our online course. We're going to be offering an exclusive launch deal to the first 50 individuals to sign up for that course. And as a thank you for those on our waiting list for being patient, we're going to offer that to you first. If you're interested in joining the people on the waiting list for the Ownership Accelerator, I'll leave a link in the show notes below and you can still join that waiting list and have access to that deal first. I'll talk more about the course later in the episode.
Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. This is episode 2 of an interview with Tanner Applegate. So George, this is another exciting interview that you would want to listen to. So introduce us to what we talked about last time, the recap, and then where we're going to go with this episode.
Yeah, so Tanner's a buddy of mine. I talked about it in the last episode. We've been friends for a couple of years now, and I think more than a couple, but he's bought 5 practices now, and they're growing quickly. And so has a great idea of the knowledge of the process of buying and, acclimating a practice to his group. And so he shares in the first episode everything up to closing date. So everything has to be taken care of beforehand. And now we're going to talk about everything from closing date, maybe throughout maybe the first 6 months to a year. Most of it's done upfront, but there are some things that kind of take a bit longer. So we talk about all that. The one point I want to make before we go in is Tanner, and we have Dr. Little on. They're buying in a group, so they're adding one practice to their existing, group, and so They have to do it in a way where it assimilates, and it's like plugging it in. So they have to, put their systems in the practice maybe in a different order. So I make a point in the episode, and I think it's important to think about if you're going into multiple versus a single, to have an idea of what your plan is so that you can think about when you want to do what. I think it matters if you're a group or if you're an individual. So I just want to make that point before we get started.
Well, and having a group's template as kind of your foundation will give you a really good overview of the important things and the little things. And this is a way that totally works. It's worked for them. And the little tweaks that you might need to make shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's mainly related to staff anyway. So
cool. Well, here we go. Interview number 2 with Tanner Applegate.
I have back with me today a good friend of mine, Tanner Applegate. I'll just kind of briefly introduce him. I met Tanner my first year of dental school, so we've known each other for about 3 years now. And Tanner is in Denver, Colorado. Him and his partner, Tanner is not a dentist himself, but his partner is, and they now have 5 practices. Just kind of briefly going over his background. We had him on a previous episode to talk about things that go on pre-acquisition. So from the time that what do you need to get an LOI, to signing that LOI, to getting a purchase agreement in place, what due diligence you do, and then what kind of things on the, transferring ownership, getting usernames, passwords, all of that stuff. What do you go into prior to closing a practice? So that's something we talked about last time, and Tanner has supplied a checklist that his company uses when they kind of go through an acquisition and just make sure that they got everything they need. The checklists are very important when you get big and you do this a few times. So we have supplied that in the show notes, and it also was announced on our Facebook page as we announced the episode. So we have back with us Tanner Applegate. Tanner, how you doing?
Good, George. Thanks for having me back.
No problem. So we left off at the acquisition. We've talked about closing, and I think let me just kind of highlight a few things from the last episode. We've already met the team. That's something that you've moved to prior to closing. And we kind of got some very loose marketing in place, and we kind of got all of our accounts set up, and we've started credentialing with insurance. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right.
So now, what's the first thing that happens after closing? So what is closing like, by the way? I imagine not a lot of have closed on a practice.
So, I mean, it can be a big deal, and it can also be a small deal. Our first practice, and I'm sure with most of these listeners, with the idea of only going into one practice, it was a big deal for us. And we went in, we had the paperwork signed. We had our first deal. We had a problem with the bank funding us on time. So it was actually kind of dramatic where I don't even want to go into it, but we signed. So signing was fun and exciting. We went and celebrated, as it should be. I think that everyone should do that because it's a big decision that you have in your life.
I kind of want to talk about the banks a little bit because I get that all the time. People, they'll message me and, sometimes just working with the wrong bank can really, really make closing stressful. And I just think it's so important to work with a bank that's on it, has an experience. People report how easy they are to work with. So people have been getting in contact with me and asking about banks. And I think that's just so smart of them because it can really, really make your closing, it's already stressful. I mean, we have a whole list of things that need to be done. The last thing you want is the bank to cause a problem.
Definitely. And we've experienced it both ways where the bank was the least of our worries and they were wanting to help with anything else that they could, such as leases. And we also had it where the bank was absolutely dragging their feet and they were a nightmare to work with. So I think that just listening to other people's experiences and how the bank handled the situation, I would definitely pay good attention to that before you decide on a bank.
Yeah, I mean, especially some big banks, man. People wouldn't realize, how bad of experiences some people have with these huge banks. And I'm just, really happy that we have some great banks that we know of and we can talk to. And, I think it can really make the process a lot easier.
I agree. And I think that a lot of people, they'll go to like conventions and trade shows and stuff, and they'll see the biggest banks there, and they think that's their only option. It really isn't. Go out and look at the credit unions they have around you. They're most likely willing to lend. Talk to other banks that are like mid-sized levels, like Bank of the West, or we're using Bank of the West Sunflower. We've used Zions in the past, and there's a lot of different options out there for banks. So make sure that you kind of shop around before you decide one or the other.
Something I've been doing for our listeners is I've been kind of talking to a bunch of banks and making sure that I know, and I kind of vet these banks for them. So, if you're kind of, stuck or you don't know what to do with the bank, just reach out to me and I'll be sure to help you out with that. So just kind of talking about closing, do you guys all sit in a room, like you, the seller, buyer, you guys all sit in the room and sign paperwork together, or is it not that dramatic?
It kind of depends on the broker. We've had brokers that they'll stop by, they'll have us sign it at our office, and then they'll stop by the other office and do it that way. Or they've also had it where we've all met up and done it that way. And it kind of depends on who is brokering that deal.
Gotcha. Okay. So then, the first thing you have on your list is that you guys get the keys. So, is that right when you sign the papers, you get the keys, or kind of when does that happen?
No. So this list right here for the after acquisition date, it's not in any specific order of what needs to be done when. I mean, in the last episode, we talked about making sure that you realize that these things are not things to be done right at acquisition, that these are things that you do when you feel like is a good time for your office. So I put them on here because I want you to know that these are things that don't necessarily need to be done, but in some offices do need to be done. And so I put them all on the same list, but they aren't in any particular order. We can go over them in just kind of the order that we have them on the sheet, but please remember that these things don't need to be done in this specific order. And so, like you said, the first thing I have on the list is get physical keys. Front door and back door are obvious, and mailboxes are pretty obvious. The third one I have on here is any random locks in the office. So if you go and you walk through the office, walk through it with the eye of, where do I have any locks in here? And you'll find some weird things, especially in a lot of older doctors' offices, that you'll just be like, okay, do you have a key or a code for that? For example, in our second deal, there was a safe that he had in the office, and we didn't get the code right away, and we didn't get it for probably a couple of weeks until he finally got back to us with it. And so I would definitely just kind of walk the office and get that before.
Okay. And, the same way, I want to go back to the timeline a little bit. So, because I think time is important to everybody to kind of get an idea of what is done when. So is it just like you go through this list and you figure out what can I do now, and then you do that thing? Is that kind of how you'd suggest doing it?
If I were doing this one-time deal, I would go ahead and I would take this list, I would read through it, see what's on there, and then I would go ahead and take the list into the office, and I would just kind of say, okay, what needs to be done when, based off of the office.
Gotcha. Okay. I just kind of want to get our ideas. Before we get into it, I wanted to get our listeners an idea of, when everything is done.
Yeah, and there's certain things that I think as we go through this list that I'll say this needs to be done right away. And And then I'll also note and say these are things that I wouldn't do for a few months. So
okay. And so the next one we have on here is the letter, the welcome letter. I think it's kind of, everyone knows what I'm talking about, where you introduce the new doctor and the family and everything. So when do you guys do that?
So this is actually letter number 2. So the first letter we do is pre-acquisition. We'll send that out before the doctor even leaves, and we'll just say, hey, Dr. So-and-so is leaving and this new doctor is coming on. Some sellers aren't comfortable sending that letter out until they're actually transitioned out, which is understandable, at which point you'll just move that to after acquisition date. But the first letter needs to be giving the doctor his due, saying, hey, he's been amazing. I'm leaving you, my patients. I'm in good hands. And so it's all about the doctor, the seller doctor on the first one. And then after time passes, so if you're able to do that before acquisition date, then after the acquisition date, then I would write the second letter and introduce the new doctor and his family.
Okay. So I think if you do it that way, then it could be like after the purchase agreement is signed, so that the doctor knows that it's for sure, for most likely going through. And then before closing, because that'd be a good time to send out that first letter if possible.
Yeah, the asset purchase agreement is usually done at close. So every time we've signed that, and then we have funded that same day. And so that usually means that we're taking over that office that day. In some situations, you're not able to. So, for example, if a new grad is coming out of school,
it's a good example.
If you come out of school and you're not able to get your license until July or something, you can still go ahead and close at the end of May, but you can have the date of acquisition be in July. So as long as that's kind of all understood beforehand, it's not something that we need to worry about right away.
Gotcha. So you just announced retirement, and then how long would you wait to send out that second letter introducing the new doctor?
We usually wait about 2 months.
Okay. And so then the next one on here is technology. So what do you guys...
So technology is going to be the most time-consuming thing, and this is technology, etc. I mean, there's other things in here, but this is when we get into it, this is what takes us most amount of time to roll over a new practice into our model. And so certain things like transferring licenses, especially if they are doing any business with larger companies like Shine or Patterson, a lot of times they won't even talk to you or do anything until you've transferred over that license. So this includes things like CAD cams and panos and cone beams. We had one where we got into it. The cone beam started acting up within the first week, and we had to wait 2 weeks while that license transferred over before they'd even send a rep out to look at it.
So what license are you talking about?
So you just the ownership of them, and that's why it's under larger technologies. So if you Patterson keeps, especially with CAD cams and stuff, they keep a very good record of who is currently owning their product. So you'll want to contact them and say there's been a change of ownership. Now the owner of this CAD cam or this cone beam or whatever is so and so, and it really depends on who is the seller of that equipment. So for example, in one office we have a planned mecha unit. The planned mecha unit, they don't really care who it is that owns that unit. And so we didn't have any need to contact them. But with the CAD cam, it's owned by Patterson, and they want to know who is it that's owning that unit. So it really depends on the office and the equipment that is in there.
Gotcha. So you should do a survey of the equipment in the office and what needs to be transferred licensing with the manufacturer and what does not, or the distributor, right, or whoever it is.
And if you're unsure, I would go ahead and just be on the safe side and contact them. And this is something that you can have the front desk people do. That's usually what we do.
So the office I'm looking at, we don't have any, pano, cone beam, CAD cam, anything like that, but we do have just digital x-rays. In your experience, has something as simple as digital x-rays needed to be transferred over?
No, not at all.
Okay.
You might need to transfer over the imaging software like I have on this list, just because if you need to call in to get any kind of help with it, it would be good that you already have it transferred over into your name.
Okay, but that's not something I could still use it without transferring it. I just have to get it done eventually. Okay.
Correct. And honestly, some people go forever just using the seller's name. I don't recommend that, just because you do want to have ownership of the stuff that is in your office.
I can agree with that. Yeah, I think laziness does not justify it there.
Right.
So the next one you have is the utilities and vendors and everything. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is also something that would fit really well, I think, beforehand. So when you did the usernames and passwords, I would also give them a list of these and say, if you could give me your contact information for each of these, then it'll make it easier that after you acquire it, you go ahead and you call all these companies and you transfer over their account into your name. And it depends on who the vendor is or who the utility company is. Sometimes you'll just have to create a new account completely and they'll just close down the seller's account, or sometimes you can just transfer it over. So what we do is we call and we say, hey, can we transfer over this account? And they'll let us know one way or the other. If they don't, we go ahead and create a new one, or we go ahead and switch it depending on what it is.
So as part of your due diligence, you'll just hand them a list like, who do you guys use for electric, internet, gas, and then you'll call all those companies to see when they can be transferred over.
I would definitely do it after the acquisition date, because you don't want to pay for gas for a month of gas that you're not actually using.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so we have a list there, and then you kind of transfer over those things. I noticed the next one on your list is transferring the practice management system to Open Dental. I'm assuming that's organization specific.
Yeah, before we jump into that one, though, I do want to say that this is a perfect time to kind of, with the utilities and vendors, this is a perfect time to be able to analyze, is what they're using enough for you? So, for example, we use voice over IP phones. So when we call, if they're not in contract with their phone company, we'll usually say, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and transfer it to our voice over IP, so we won't even renew it. Or like the internet, maybe they're using 5 megabytes of internet where you feel like, oh, let's go ahead and up it. So just to give you, the listeners, an example, we bought an office. We called the internet company. He was on an old internet package from 5-6 years ago. When I told them that I wanted to up it from like the 10 megs that he had to 60 megs, we actually ended up saving like $80 a month because he was just on this old package. So those are things that you might want to look at as well.
Okay. And do you guys, because I know like you'll probably run like a special promotion. Do you guys like renegotiate those every year, or do you not really care, like a increase of like $100 a month or whatever?
Well, the problem is that by signing those promotions, you also end up signing a long-term contract with them. And so for certain things like the internet, we are very heavy on internet traffic, so we like to up our bandwidth, so we don't like to get into a contract at all. If, for example, we end up having CenturyLink and they're really bad in that area, and we want to be able to switch over to Comcast, for example, we want to make sure that those options are open and that we're not locked into like a 2 or 3 year contract. So we'd rather pay a little bit more and not have a contract than get locked into a lower price, but you're locked into it for a few years.
That makes sense. Especially for a dental practice, you're not really interested in the free iPad. I think you're more interested in whatever, having the flexibility and the reliability of service. So that's a great point. And, I'm happy that wasn't too minute of a question.
Right. And I do think, though, that there's no reason not to do it eventually. So in a lot of our offices that we've been in for a longer time, we've decided, okay, this is a great company for us. Let's go ahead and get the lower deal by getting into the promotion. And that locks us in. But it's because we've decided that that's what's going to be best for us.
At the beginning of the episode, I talked about the conversations that I had with Richard before coming on as the co-host of this podcast. One of the motivations I had for doing what I do now is to help make information more accessible to everybody than it was for me when I tried to get all this information. And in the process of doing this podcast and helping people look at practices for more than 2 years now, I've learned a lot, and I've looked at a lot of practices. I've been very fortunate. And so I've always wanted to make a course geared towards somebody who's looking to buy a practice, and Richard wanted to do the same thing. So what we did was I teamed up with Paul Goodman. Most of you know Paul is a dentist and a broker in the Northeast, and we set up a comprehensive course that goes through the whole process of from the moment that you decide to buy a practice to early ownership. It goes through the entire process, finding deals, negotiating deals, getting deals done with lawyers, and I felt like I needed somebody like Paul to do the course with me to make sure that we're covering everything comprehensively. And then not only will we have Paul participating in the course, we're also going to have a banker, David Alvey, lawyer, Rob Montgomery. We're going to have a buyer's consultant, Brian Pinder. We have professionals in their own areas because I didn't feel like Paul or I could really cover the entire topic. And so for more information on this course, we're going to be announcing it on our Facebook page, the podcast, and our email list. And for those of you who have been waiting on our waiting list, I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we're going to be offering a promotion to those who have been waiting as a thank you for being patient with us. And for the first 50 people to sign up for the course, they'll be saving 25% of the total price. To sign up for our waiting list, you can still do it before the course is released on a link in the description below that is for our waiting list. So don't miss out on the Ownership Accelerator. Gotcha. And so anything else to add on vendors and transferring utilities?
No, we can go ahead and transfer practice management software. So the reason why I thought about just doing transfer practice management software, but I added Open Dental on here just because I do know that a lot of the podcast world is pro Open Dental. I mean, you see it all over on Dental Town and stuff as well. And so I left it that way just because it is easier to do. For us, practice management software is a non-negotiable, and it's something that we do within the first month or so and do a lot of training on. So I left it that way just because if you do end up wanting to transfer to there, it also includes another list with it that I wanted to go over.
Okay. And so, in my case, I have the office I'm looking at has Dentrix, and I'm planning on keeping Dentrix. So I would just probably have like a list of setting up Open Dental. I maybe would just check to make sure that all of these are in place. Is that how you would say, if we're keeping the practice management software, how to approach this?
Yeah, I would say that if you're keeping the practice management software, chances are you're going to step into functioning with the practice management software the same way that the seller doc was. And so you probably don't need to go in and change any of this. I would just leave it the way that it is until you get trained on it. So for you and I, George, we're techies. So I'm sure that we're never going to have a program that we don't dig into what are all the benefits of this program. As you go in and you learn more benefits of how like Dentrix works or how different practice management softwares work, then I would start making changes slowly. It's not something that you need to do right away.
Okay. So for somebody who is transferring the practice management software, can you kind of go through that list of things that you would do?
So practice management software, I can speak specifically for Open Dental. I can't talk about any other program just because I don't have any experience transferring to them.
That's fine.
I have worked with Dentrix, EagleSoft, PracticeWorks, and Curve. And of those four, I still will forever be a fan of Open Dental just because of the documentation that they have online is just unmatched. So whenever we switch to Open Dental, there's two phases. There's the test conversion phase for the database and then the actual conversion. And so you need to kind of plan that out a little bit. We've done it where we've done the test conversion on one day and the very next day we did the final conversion. Open Dental doesn't recommend that. They recommend that you spread it about a week out and that you go through the test conversion after it's been done and you make sure that the information is correct. Or it matches the previous practice management software.
Okay, so you just, whenever you change practice management softwares, you want to do like a little test to make sure that everything's transferring and it's not like weird things are coming up in weird sections before you do a final. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So then what kind of things are you looking for when you set it up?
So they really pound the accounts receivable. So if you end up having a conversion and your accounts receivable are $6,000 off or something, I mean, that's $6,000 that you've lost somewhere because you're not going to know that you even need to follow up with it. So those are the type of things. That's the main thing that you want to check. You also want to make sure that like the social security numbers and the contact information and all the important patient information is transferred over. That also goes with like clinical notes and stuff. You want to make sure that the clinical notes have transferred over as clean as possible. There have been, some programs convert over more easily than others. And obviously whoever you convert to is going to help you. In Open Dental, I know that they've been a lot of help for us when we convert from different ones. Dentrix and EagleSoft, they convert really cleanly. PracticeWorks, they like with accounts receivable and stuff, just because of the way that PracticeWorks works, it converts over a little bit more of a mess. But Open Dental is there to kind of guide you on how to do it. They've got great customer service.
And Tanner, so I guess, we're buddies, so it's kind of hard for me not to ask you questions that are unrelated a little bit. But would you guys buy the AR, or do you guys leave the AR?
So that is something that we fill out during our doctor conversation. So if the doctor had a horrible system in place about collecting AR, we usually won't buy that. If they had a good, clean system and we know that it's predictable that we're going to cash in on this AR, then we will buy it.
Okay. Anyway, let's continue on. Anything else you want to add about the Open Dental?
No, for setting it up, though, all of these things, like I said, the documentation is all online to do it. These are things that we get in and we change right away, just because when we train for Open Dental, we only want to train once. So we'll set it up first and then we'll train on it. If you're coming into your first office and you don't have a lot of experience with stuff like Open Dental, if you do end up transferring to it, I would just leave it as kind of default for a while and fill it out, and then start learning about these different features that they have that you can add on later on.
Okay. I guess it's so what happens in that interim time, from the time you buy the practice to the time you've changed over practice manager? Are you guys still seeing patients, or do you close the office, or what happens?
No, we definitely are. So we'll leave it the way that it is. So with our last acquisition, we left it for Dentrix for 2 weeks and just ran it as normal as they were doing before. At which point we then transferred it over and we trained them on it at that point.
Okay. And so anything else you want to say about Open Dental before we move on?
Nope.
So you kind of have here a list of services that you guys like to use, and so I'm assuming you'll be converting over to them. I do want to ask you one thing, though. When you look at a P&L, and, I look at them all the time, and I see, somebody's paying a ridiculous amount of money for this service that I know that, if I were to buy the practice, I would go and change to this service. Do you make that adjustment pre-closing, or do you just kind of assume that all your expenses will be the same when, in fact, they won't be?
I make that adjustment for my own personal sake, but I don't base any pricing or anything off of it. So I would, for example, and internet's a great example for it, or phones. We have, for phones, actually let's do with phones. So we use Mango Voice, which is a voice over IP phone. We pay $60 a month for our for our phones, which I know that every office we get into, that's an immediate savings. However, if we get into an office and we find out that they have a 2-year contract with CenturyLink for their phones, that is a cost that we'll be able to save down the road, but it's not a cost that we'll be able to save right away. So it is something that I don't ever put any value into it. I don't ever value the practice based off of what I think that we will be able to save, but it is nice to know.
Okay, because another one I see is accounting fees. People pay some ridiculous money for kind of stuff like professional fees and stuff like that. So it's always, it's something I've always been wondering.
Yeah, and I think that's variable. And if we're targeting a new person that's coming into their first office, they're not going to know what the cost of those are anyways. It's kind of going to be as they play it by ear. So,
Gotcha. Okay, so what programs do you guys like to use? We talked about Open Dental already.
We talked about Open Dental. My non-negotiables that I absolutely am in love with are Open Dental, Gusto, and Mango Voice. So Gusto is a newer company. They're based out of San Diego. They are a payroll company, and they are the first payroll company that I've seen that has really modernized the payroll system. So they will take care of a lot of the nuisance filings, and they have an unbelievable cost structure. So it's very clear. They say, I think it's like a $30 base, and don't quote me on this. It's like a $30 base, and then you pay like $8 a month for each employee. And so for us, we've been able to keep it below $100 a month for each office. And that is $100 a month is usually what a normal accounting firm will charge you for payroll. So it's really been cost effective for us. It's really time effective. And so it's a program that I will probably never ever switch from. The third one being Mango Voice. It is a voice over IP company. And like I said, I'm able to get the whole office phone lines for $30 a month. So, and then they've also got amazing features where, because it's voice over IP, they have a utility online that you can go in and use. And so in our situation, if we have an office that is closed for example, we have an office that closes at 3 p.m. Well, we want to make sure that phones are covered from 3 to 7. So we go ahead and just transfer that phone automatically. I mean, this does it in the program. So once that office closes, that phone line then gets transferred to another phone, and they answer it there just as if they were in the office. And so it's got a lot of really neat features that I think that every office should have, just because A, they're cost effective, and B, there's no reason not to do it if you're going to be saving money and using these features anyway. So Mango Voice, the rest of these are kind of normal ones that you hear about in the dental industry. Solution Reach, we're okay with them. We're not in love with them. We've got a really good negotiated rate with them, so that's why we continue to use them. Podium has done a great job for us at getting a lot of patient reviews, and I think that is extremely important in the 21st century. We have one office that went from 0 to 70 reviews within, I think, like 3 or 4 months, and it is unbelievable the difference in new patients between those two, like from when we started patient reviews to after we started patient reviews, just because people, what they do is they go on Google and they type in dentist and they go to the one that has the most reviews. So I highly recommend that as an important thing to get instated into each office. Dental intel, metrics tracking, that's important. There's a lot of different options out there. We're not in love with one or the other. Slack, inter-office communication. So this is important for us. The reason why I like Slack as opposed to like a chat feature on the computer is that the team can install it both on their computer and on their phone. So, for example, if we're working in the office and the front desk lady needs to say something to the assistant in the back, she can go ahead and send her a message on Slack. Well, if we're at home and we need to, for example, we're having a snowstorm, we need to cancel patients the next day, instead of calling or texting everyone, we use that same program and it gets it out to everyone because they have it both on their computer and their phone. So that's been really helpful for us. The only problem with Slack is it is not HIPAA compliant. I know that, so we don't ever send any patient information over it. We have found that it is HIPAA compliant if you send the patient number over it, because it doesn't identify to the person unless you have the software. So that's compliant. The next one is Onedrive, so file sharing. So this is especially important for like training documents or for front desk stuff. So we have our usernames locked down into a file that we have, and then we share it over OneDrive, and so that kind of helps us out there. Renaissance is just our clearinghouse that ties into our practice management software, and then PayConnect is our merchant service that we use, and those are, I mean, obviously the must-haves, but they're different for every office. That's just who we use.
Okay, and I think it's cool for. I have some differing services I want to use. Richard and I are actually thinking about using Gusto ourselves. We have an admin assistant on, so it's nice to kind of have that as an option. We really like that company, and everyone we've been talking to has been a big fan of them also. But I think it's nice that you have the services you use on there. Obviously, there's a lot of opinions on those, so definitely not set in stone. But it's nice that you gave that to us. We appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, the only ones here that we are absolutely in love with are the first 3. The rest that we could switch in a heartbeat because we're not super loyal to them. So I agree. There are differing opinions, and these have just been the ones that have worked for us.
I'm going to do a shout out to Practice by Numbers. RealHit is awesome, and you have Dental Intel on there, which is great. But I did a boot camp with them, and I absolutely love their software. They are awesome. So I just want to. Anyone who's looking for metrics, I think they're my opinion at least.
I agree. I mean, I think Dental Intel's got a great product, but I do think that they are overpriced for what they provide, and so I would definitely look around and like just like with you do with any, when you define your practice, you got to define what is it that you want out of your metrics tracking software. And I do think that in this day and age, it is something that you do need to have. So
absolutely. So the next one you have on here is to set up a remote desk. Is that just
this is?
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a convenience feature more than anything. I mean, for a lot of the doctors and stuff, Open Dental, I speak about them a lot because that's all I know, but they do have a feature where you're able to now access your schedule online. It's a little bit more. We just set up a remote desktop because if for any reason I need to access a file that's on a computer, it's easy to do with remote desktop. And so I'll just log into the computer and do anything that I need to do. So this is like, it's another company specific thing, but it is a nice feature to have if you're curious about what patients am I going to see the next day and so on and so forth.
No, I think that's great. I think everyone should have a remote desktop. The next one you have on here is break-even point. It's something I'm a little bit passionate about, as nerdy as that sounds. I'm a big believer in knowing your break-even point and using it in your accounting metrics because it has such a big effect on your overhead. Knowing it and using that number effectively. We'll probably do an episode on it some later season, but in the meantime, can you talk about your break-even point, what that means, and how you use it and how you calculate it?
Yeah. So this break-even point, I'll calculate my estimation of break-even point before I even get into the office with my projected financials that I took the seller's financial and kind of projected what our financials will be. So I have a rough estimate at the beginning of what our break-even point is. But after about 3 months of steady expenses, so I say 3 months of steady expenses because at the beginning you're going to have a lot of one-time expenses, and those are going to really throw off your break-even point. And so I would say like after the first 2 months or something, so I would say by the end of the 5th month, if you go back and look at the 3 months before that, then you should be able to accurately determine what is your break-even point.
So ignore the first 60 days.
I would ignore the first 60 days just because you do run into a lot of expenses that you won't normally have. For example, if you do convert over to Open Dental, you're going to have roughly $1,000 conversion fee that you won't have any other time. So you don't want that to throw off your break-even point.
Okay. And for our listeners, a break-even point is essentially taking all of the expenses you expect per month and calculating them to say what is the minimum amount that you have to collect to make no money. Would you think that's a good way of describing it?
I think that's a great way of describing it.
So it's a valuable piece of information to have because, let's just say you hit that the first 2 weeks of every month, then you know that the next 2 weeks, everything you produce and collect is the only expenses you have after that are your variable costs, your supplies and lab. So it's just nice to know that number. And I think that's an incredibly important number to go off of. But, people have varying opinions. But I think it's also great to know, and that's how you calculate it.
Yeah, I know that Mark Costas is, maybe it's Scotland, one of the two.
It's Scott.
They're big fans of knowing their break-even point because then at that point, well, I can do this crown. The person's not going to pay full fee. I'm already in profit. I might as well do it for a 20% discount or whatever. And so you have a lot more ability to leverage the cost of each procedure after you've already hit break-even point. So
yeah, exactly.
It's nice to know.
It's something I learned from Scott Luna at Breakaway, and it's something I really appreciate that lesson. So we talked about the team pre-acquisition. So you kind of have a post-acquisition team meeting here. Kind of what stuff do you go over in that meeting?
So we have this well-defined for somebody that's going to come in and start from the ground up. This isn't going to be as defined, but it is something that I feel like needs to be defined within the first 6 months. So our why meeting is our mission, vision, and values meeting. So we go in and we say the reason why we are in business is for this purpose. And for us, obviously, it's to make a difference, as our name alludes to. And so we'll go in and we'll have that meeting. We'll just say, hey, this company is going to operate under these vision and values. And we also will be measuring you based off of these vision and values. So we set that expectation very clear from day one. And this is something that we say that has to be done right at the beginning for us. Because we have them already defined, we want the team to know that this is what they're getting into. If you don't match up with our vision and values, then now is a good time to go ahead and start looking, because these are something that are very dear to us and non-negotiable. And I feel like more offices and businesses in general need to have their mission, vision, and values defined, because it's amazing the change in processes and the change in culture. Once you've defined these as a group, that you really do become more effective, and you start working towards a common goal. It is amazing.
Do you mind if I interject a little bit about the why meeting?
Go ahead.
I think for you guys, you have 5. The next one is going to be getting 6. So you guys kind of have a predetermined that the rest of your 5 practices kind of follow this, mission, vision, and values. I think for somebody buying their first, I think it's important to have that going in, but kind of let the team maybe be a little bit more involved in making that, because you don't really necessarily have it so rigid like you guys do. But I do think it's important to get it defined early. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I suggest people working with somebody, if you're going to, like Justin Short or somebody like that, beforehand, because you can get that defined before stepping in. I think that's important to get something defined before stepping in. And I just kind of wanted to contrast the difference between a group model where that's already very much set in stone and maybe an individual buying a single practice where there's some leniency a little bit. Would you think that's a fair assessment?
I think that's a very great point, George. Going into it in the first office, the people that I know that currently have one office, I would not say that it should be top down. I think that if you're going to work together as a team and you expect your team to kind of align to these values, I would make it as a team. And so that's why I say within the first 6 months, because if you come in, no one's going to be comfortable with each other if you try and do it within the first 2 weeks or so. But I would say that if you wait till like month 3 or 4 or 5, when you start feeling comfortable with each other, that would be a good time to talk about mission, vision, and values, because nobody's going to open up and really explain what is important to them at the very beginning of a relationship. And it's not going to be until you get comfortable with each other that they really say, you know what, I feel like integrity is a non-negotiable for me. Can it be something that's a part of a company? It's a heartfelt process. It's something that is very opening and enlightening, and I would not do it within just like a 30-minute time frame or an hour time frame. It's something that the successful people that we have seen that have done it have made it kind of an all-day thing. Well, they'll go and they'll do something as a group during the morning, and then at the end of the day, they'll sit down and they'll kind of hash out what are the vision and values of this company, and can we hold you all accountable to it?
Yeah, I think that it's very important, this process. I'm happy we're kind of harped on it a little bit. And, you guys set it up early because you already have that defined. But, for somebody else, I think it's good that we went through that process of what it would look like.
Yeah. And honestly, George, I feel like that this could, whether it be me or whether it be somebody else, I think that this should be a podcast on episode by itself, because it really is so important for practice.
We have that it's not scheduled officially yet, but we have a guest in mind for that. But I appreciate you saying that. And so foreshadowing for anybody listening, if it hasn't come out already, then there will be an episode on that. Very, very important.
Okay, I got to take something back that I said in the last ad. I said that your neck hurts because you're looking over the top of your loops more than your angle of declination. Really, it's all of it together. And the angle of declination really does matter. And in fact, I said, if I want as much as possible, they said, okay, let's go with 50. You don't want to go with 60. That's too much. Let's do 50. And it's been awesome. It's been great. But now I want to look at, how do you diagnose if your loops aren't working for you? And for me, the biggest sign is if my neck and my upper mid back, kind of between my scapula and my spine, hurts. And you get these tight knots. They're called trigger points. And if you're right-handed and the right side of your back from the base of your skull down to your scapula to your upper shoulder hurts and is tight and has knots, it probably means you're bending over too much. You're craning too much. Something else that can help with your ergonomics, not only is magnification and loops in general going to help, but your working distance can push you back and up. It can retrain you. So getting a new pair of loops can also be an opportunity to learn how to sit better. If you push it out a few inches, your working distance, at first it's going to be a little unnatural. You're going to be kind of leaning in like you normally did, and then you realize, oh, I'm too close. But over time, you train and you adjust, and your muscles learn how to sit up straight. So this is an ideal time to correct some of your bad habits and take your ergonomics to the next level. For $100 off a pair of loops or $300 off loops and light combo, email sales@QOptics with the promo code SP16. QOptics, your next favorite pair of loops.
So you talked about training your team on specific tasks. So we've established our mission, vision, and values. What do you guys do next?
And so these are tasks. Like I said, these are ones. This is a task that I would not do right away. Obviously, it depends on certain things. So for like this task list and the patient task list, so these are like checklists that we have come up with for the individual position. So for our front desk staff, we have a list of everything that they need to do monthly, weekly, and then daily This is stemmed off of Scott Luna's help that he kind of gives in his resources. These are huge helps to the staff. A lot of dentists think that, I don't want to go ahead and constrict my staff by making them do these checklists. It's amazing, though, when you do give them a checklist, how freeing it is for the team member. Because to be able to have all the information down on a sheet, to be able to see this is exactly what you expect of me, it really is very liberating. And I've seen that with team members that have fought it like crazy. We had one that she fought it, she hated it. She ended up leaving and going to another office, and she contacted me and said, hey, I missed those checklists. Can I get a copy of one? Just because I want to know what it is. I'm feel like things are slipping through the cracks. So these are things that I wouldn't necessarily do right away. If you come in and try and make dramatic changes like this, you're going to get pushback from the staff because it says to them that you don't feel like they're competent in what they're doing. So this is something that I would wait down the road 4 or 5 months as well. Wait till you have a relationship with them, so that way you can really sit down and explain to them, hey, this is not because I don't think you know what you're doing. It's because this is really going to be a benefit to you, and here's why. And then that same thing with the patient task list. I would keep it status quo for a while before you kind of introduce these. This is good because then it'll standardize the patient experience. If they go through and they have the same thing happening to them every time, they'll learn to expect it. And that's kind of really a key in the dental office, because a lot of people are already kind of have this fear that you want to be able to kind of create some comfort for them. So it's a non-negotiable in our office, but it is something that we implement months down the road instead of right away.
Well, I was mainly going to make a point that, in your case, you guys implement it months down the road. So in our case, I think it's also kind of on the later of the list. But also, I think in a specific office, things are done differently. So having that time to build that relationship with that team member and see how they do things, then you can kind of tailor the checklist towards the way they do it, assuming that they do it well. Is that fair to say?
Totally. And I think that it is different for each team, because for some people, you're going to do certain things and not others, but there's also going to be things like submit claims that everyone's going to do. So the checklist is good to look at other people's, but you're right, it is going to be tailored by the team. Okay. And then anything else you do with your team? The last one, policies and procedures. This is something that we do at the beginning. We do it during the Y meeting or shortly after. This is just kind of things like, hey, we expect you to be on time. We expect you to do these things. We introduce the employee manual, and then we have them sign it. And legally, that's something that needs to be done sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I think signing that, holds them accountable. So if they're not following to it, then, there's no question as to why they're getting whatever they're getting from that.
Right. And as far as employee manuals go, it's kind of a roll the dice type of game. So if you're willing to live on risks, then I would just kind of find one that you're able to tailor to your office. But if you want it to be solid and make sure that you're covered in any kind of possible situation, then I would definitely hire a company to get you the most up-to-date employee manual.
I think that's a good point. Anything else you do with the employees?
Nope.
Okay. So the next section is clinical things like supplies and all that kind of stuff. So what do you guys do there?
So we have the supply master list. So we went in and we've created a list of all the different supplies that we order. And I know that there are lists out there. If you guys want our master list, we're able to, I'd be more than happy to share it. I know that Scott Luna has it in his presentations as well, of different things that they make sure that they have on hand. So I think it would be important to find a master list and just make sure that you have the supplies that you need for at least the first few weeks of operation. We got into an office where the seller doc knew he was leaving, and he ran the office dry, and we got into it, and we were just limping along for the first few weeks. Luckily, we had other offices to fall back on, but if that was the only office we had, we would have been essentially dead in the water, because it would have taken us at least a week to be able to get supplies in. I know that the bigger companies like Shine and stuff, they're able to get stuff in quicker, but you're going to pay a pretty high premium for that.
And yeah, if you could send that to me, then I could share it along with the checklist that everyone's kind of having right now. So I think that'll really help them out.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, so you order the necessary supplies, and then you guys set up tackle boxes. I see here on the list. Yeah, I like tackle boxes, but that's not necessarily everyone has to do that.
Right. It's not. It's something that we like to do because if you have a lot of ops, so we have one office that has 6 ops and the doctor works out of 3 of them. So instead of having to stock 3 different ops, we just have the tackle box that has each individual procedure. And so that way, if they're doing a root canal, they go and grab a root canal thing. It doesn't matter which op they're working out of. They'll have everything there that they need. So we are big advocates of that.
Yeah, I like the tackle boxes too, but I think that's not the traditional way people use them, right?
No, I don't think that it is.
Yeah, that sounds different than the way I had imagined it. But either way, find a way to, have a system that works for you and organize your supplies, I think is kind of just important.
Yep, definitely a good way to cover that.
Sure. And, so we talked about marketing a little bit. At what point do you guys start marketing on the new website? I think that's our last topic we're going to talk about here, post-acquisition.
So marketing for us is one of the last things that we do, and it's also kind of why it's last on the list. If you're getting into an office that has if you're taking over a retiring dentist that has 0 marketing and he's been doing word of mouth forever, and you want to just increase patient flow right away, then I would start on this a lot sooner rather than later. But if you're getting into an office whose production is already going to stretch you and you are booked out for a while, then marketing is less important. And it's actually going to be a lot more cost, so I wouldn't suggest doing it right away. There are things like patient reviews that are going to build up time. So I would start that as soon as you feel comfortable that patients are going to give you a good review. And then there's also things like, about the patient review thing, we have an office that, because we were ran dry and because we had kind of shorthanded, the office was pretty chaotic for 2 weeks or so. And we didn't want patients leaving us a review on those kind of things. So we didn't start that right away. But there are things that you'll be able to fill out. Okay, this is something that we need right away. For example, appointment cards, even if it's just kind of like with basic branding and stuff, or you just create it from a template that you found online, I would get appointment cards or your own business cards as a dentist as soon as possible, because it's amazing how many people ask for those when they come and they find out that there's a new doctor.
Okay, that's good. And I want to make a point about marketing. People have asked me all the time, like, what are your marketing plans when you take over your office and everything? And so I thought I could comment on that. Maybe you could give your opinion. The practice I'm looking at, I kind of found it, I don't know if you listened to my episode, but based on patient flow. So they get about 25 new patients a month, but I think the more important thing is to come in and get, like what you said, a good feel for the schedule and how much marketing is needed. And before I would go invest in marketing, I would stop at the phones first, and I would make sure that we're converting and answering. And then if the schedule looks like it could use some, patients, and the phones are being answered properly, then I would then go to spend money on marketing. But first, I would even go internal marketing first, so like, referrals and all those kinds of things, and then I would go external. So that's kind of the way I would do it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that it really depends on what kind of office you're getting into. I mean, if you're getting into a retiring doctor that has a patient list of 2,000 patients, but he's only having like 1,200 active ones, you have these 800 that haven't been in a while. I think there's no reason not to start with them. It's going to cost you a lot less to get them in the door. And it also kind of depends on, like we've talked about already, if the doctor is at the production level that you want, then there's no need to do huge amounts of marketing, because there's no reason why you should increase the amount of patient flow that you currently have. That is to say, though, that if you do need to make sure that there will naturally be patient attrition no matter what. So you want to make sure that you account for that. So you will need some type of marketing, whether that be down the road or not, but you will want to make sure that you're kind of comfortable with whatever production that you do. A lot of doctors think that they get into an office and they have to just build it no matter what happens. Well, that's not necessarily true if you've already defined what kind of practice it is that you want, what kind of production numbers you're expecting.
And I think you make a great point about engaging the inactive patients. I'm really happy you said that. And the other thing is, you talk about the production level. I think it's so important for people to know what their ideal office size is, both when they're selecting an office, determining how important the demographics are for growth, and then determining when to start marketing and how much. So I know it's not related to this topic, but it's just, I can't not say that point. But do you have anything else that you want to add in terms of marketing?
I don't. And I just want, I'm sure there's a dentist listening that feels bad because he's not putting a lot of time or money into marketing. I don't think that that's necessarily a problem. I think that if you have established a lifestyle that you feel comfortable with, and it's because of the current amount of production that you're doing, great. I think there's nothing wrong with leaving it the way that it is. So
it's kind of funny because this process seems so daunting for, I think, us who haven't gone through it, and, you know, myself included in that for sure. And to lay it out like this, it doesn't seem that bad. Is this really all that there is to the process of taking over a practice?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we've gone through, and obviously we've pinpointed a few holes like credentialing of insurance and stuff. And I think that that's why listening to your podcast is so helpful, because you guys have gone through and kind of helped get a lot of clarification on those finer details. But for this acquisition thing, I mean, this is what we take, and this is what we go in and we go through and we do it all. And from day one after acquisition to about 6 months in, this is everything that we do. I mean, you mentioned a few things that aren't on here, like auditing phone calls and that kind of stuff. For us, that's stuff that we do down the road once we've established a relationship with the team, because we want to make sure that they don't feel like we're this big bad guy coming in and just telling them that they're doing a horrible job when they feel competent at what they're doing. So there are things that you can expand upon, but these aren't things that are requisite for an acquisition. So this list right here, it's probably not all inclusive. I'm sure there's a few things that I'm forgetting on here, but it definitely will help you get through the process a little bit more predictably.
Yeah, and I think it's so fantastic that we have this resource. And, you know, for what you guys are doing, you know, you're bringing on a group, and we're having another group come on and talk about their process. Hunter Smith, I'm sure you know him. And, you know, I just think it's so valuable to have actually it's Hunter's partner, Will, but, you know, their group. But I think it's just so valuable to have the groups come and help us a little bit in terms of the process, because you guys have done this a few times now. And we love getting different opinions. And I think you just offered a great perspective, much more culture, team-driven. And we really appreciate you coming on. Do you have anything you want to add before we sign off?
No, I mean, if you guys have any questions about anything that we've said here, you want a little bit more expansion, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is going to be on this file. It's at the bottom, as well as a little bit more about our company. Feel free to ask me any type of question. I'm open. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and then I'm also part of a lot of the shared podcast Facebook group. So you can find me there as well. But like I said, we're a very open book company. So if you guys want to know anything, if you ever want to come check out our operations in Denver, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll help out in any way that I can.
Yep. That's a very, very generous offer, Tanner. We appreciate you coming on. And Tanner's a buddy of mine, so he's definitely a good guy. And he's very driven and he's doing really good things. And it's going to be fun to watch your progress.
Awesome. Thanks, George, for having me on.
Alrighty.
Okay, George, here is the most important part of that whole episode for me. He mentioned acquiring this practice, and there was a safe, and they didn't have the key to the safe. And you failed as a podcast interviewer to ask the obvious follow-up question. Well, what was in the safe? Like, that's all I want to know now is what was in that freaking safe. Like, what would you have a safe for in your dental office? Like, was he storing drugs? Like, what would be safe worthy in a dental practice? Cash? What do you think?
Richard, this is the reason why my interviews run on time and yours go over. It's because you ask what's in the safe.
Oh, it's so important. Okay. We might have to send a follow-up email about the safe.
Yeah, hopefully I can get Tanner to post if he knows anything on the Facebook group what's in that safe.
Yes, please. And I'll be able to sleep at night. One of the hypotheses of this season was that fear of the unknown, or of the overwhelming process of an acquisition, would keep people from doing it and would cause them to delay. So it's like, yeah, I want to acquire a practice, but you don't know what to do, and it seems so overwhelming. So you have more resistance going into it. You have more reasons to procrastinate, and you don't have a clear path. So this was just a phenomenal set of episodes giving a very clear, specific path of okay, now that you're at this point in the process, bam, 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 before closing, after closing, it was awesome.
Yeah. And, I think it's such a daunting process, or, even I'm, somebody who spent a lot of time looking into these things, feel very overwhelmed by the idea of transitioning a practice as ownership. And so seeing it laid out in a checklist format where you just do these things, at the end, I was like, is that really it? Like, something I felt was so daunting is just just that PDF that we have. Is that really all that's involved? And, the answer is yes, because they've done it, this many times. And the point I want to make is, no matter what, no matter how poorly or well you do it, it'll be done in a couple months, for the most part. So it's good to have a plan and to know exactly what it is, which is the purpose of these episodes, but it'll be done. And then you'll be an owner and, you'll move on with your life. So I think it's really valuable to go over this content. It makes me feel a lot better about going into it myself.
Well, and it's going to be chaotic and it's going to be a ton of work. It's going to be, some sleepless, stressful nights, but like you said, it's going to be done. And I feel like our audience should now have a sense of, I can do this. Like this is, sure, it's going to suck, but I can totally do this. And so that was, if we've accomplished that, hopefully we've given you the courage to take one step forward and get started on this process sooner rather than later, and with much more of a clear pathway to get there.
Yeah. I think from everyone I've heard from, super fired up about ownership from the podcast, and that's kind of the point. So, I think we're doing what we need to be doing, and they're getting the information they need to be getting. So all good things from me.
All good things. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening. Thanks for all the reviews. Thanks for mentioning George on the reviews. And we will gladly take any more of those. Join us on the Facebook group, sign up for the email list. And then also this document will be on our resources page. So there's a spot on our website that has all of the downloads and PDFs that we've mentioned. They're all there on that one spot. And you're going to have to put your email in there. We don't want just like random people downloading this and distributing it. We want to be in contact with the people who care about our stuff and are using these things. So don't be weirded out if you have to put your email in and then go to your email and like click on a link to download this file, but it'll be there for you in that resources section, as well as the show notes of this episode. Awesome. Thank you guys, and we'll talk to you next week on the Shared Practices podcast.